I try not to watch snuff movies, okay? But those of you like me who are both chronically online and chronically obsessed with social justice issues have had the misfortune of seeing a lot of people getting killed lately. And I've been talking about different sites and configurations of that killing. And I'm just pulling out one particular one that seemed to cause a kind of a ripple, certainly in the United States, but kind of interestingly internationally too. And I don't know how much it also caused a ripple in South Africa, which is the public execution of Renee Good. And I want to start with two quotes to explain what I do when I'm doing this kind of thinking that I do, because I haven't got a real job. So the first is a quote that is actually my email signature now, because I've been so interested in Mahmoud Madani. Those of you who are interested in that kind of politics, this is the mayor of New York's father, the Ugandan decolonial theorist who was at UCT and has now disappeared into the Western trap. And he says, atrocity cannot be its own explanation. Violence cannot be allowed to speak for itself, for violence is not its own meaning. To be made thinkable, it needs to be historicized, okay? And in one way, what I'm going to try and do today is to historicize some violence. And then I'm going to dip into a totally opposite intellectual tradition, which is George Orwell's 1984, where he says, the party told you to reject the evidence of your own eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. And to kind of work in the space between those two things, because what I really work on is, what does violence mean? Not like what are the causes of violence. It's like, when people are doing the kind of everyday understanding of violence that everyone does all the time, what are they doing in terms of meanings, okay? And so...
In the vehicle, there's the vehicle reversing. Now the officer on the other side of the car, as the SUV pulls away, opens fire.
Because when you watch that little clip, it's about 12 seconds long. It doesn't say much about itself. It's a bit of a, in one sense, a kind of an enigmatic surface that people can attribute meaning to. And what I'm interested in is the attributions of meaning that people have made. So the first thing that happens is, of course, the state kicked in with their meaning-making systems to make sense of this little incident, okay? And so Trump was always kind of first out the gate, saying that what we need to know about this is that the ICE agent acted in self-defense, that Renee Good, who's the deceased in this case, ran him over with her car, and that the agent was recovering from his injuries in hospital. So that was the official leader of the free world's version of this event. His deputy, J.D. Vance, was a little more subtle and described this as a tragedy of her own making, and that she was, like so many of us, a victim of left-wing ideology. But the real kind of meat and potatoes of this ideological narrative comes from someone known as Ice Barbie, otherwise birth name Kristi Noem, the Director of Homeland Security in the United States. And she made a number of points. She said, firstly, that Renee was a part of a group of protesters who were harassing these ICE agents, that they blocked the ICE agents in. Then one of them had attacked the agent with their car, and she concluded that this was an act of domestic terrorism. And I want to show you this at work.
At 10:25 a.m. Central Time, Immigration and Customs Enforcement were carrying out lawful operations here in Minneapolis. Because of the adverse weather that Minneapolis has seen in recent snow, one of the vehicles became stuck and ensnared in the snow. Law enforcement were attempting to push out this vehicle, and when a mob of agitators that were harassing them all day began blocking them in, shouting at them, and impeding law enforcement operations. ICE officers and agents approached the vehicle of the individual in question, who was blocking the officers in with her vehicle, and she had been stalking and impeding their work all throughout the day. ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism.
That's the state version of events, okay? Then there's kind of multiple other versions of events, including the kind of versions by researchers and by investigative journalists. And their kind of summary of this, the neutral summary that tries to be as little interpretative as possible, is Renee Good, a 37-year-old US citizen, was fatally shot by United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Jonathan Ross on January the 7th, 2026. And here is a investigative journalist analysis.
Good, who lived nearby, stopped her SUV perpendicular to traffic. Phone video apparently taken by Jonathan Ross, the ICE agent who later shoots Good, shows him exiting an SUV parked south of Good. The video was shared with Minnesota-based conservative media outlet Alpha News. He walks around her SUV counterclockwise.
That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you.
While Ross is circling Good's SUV, we see Good wave a vehicle by through the open driver's side window. She appears to keep waving at a truck which parks closely, perpendicular to Good's SUV. This is Becca Good. Sources close to the investigation confirmed Becca is Renee Good's wife. As Ross walks around the SUV, he encounters Becca, and Becca and Ross appear to be filming each other with their phones. Two ICE agents exit this truck, the one that parked north of Good's SUV. At the same time, Ross rounds the front passenger side of Good's SUV, and Becca Good tries to open that door. The two agents approach the SUV and order Renee Good to get out of the vehicle. One agent attempts unsuccessfully to open Good's door. Good reverses her SUV, and Ross is now seen near the front driver's side. In Ross's phone video, you can hear Becca Good say, "Drive, baby, drive." And we see Renee Good turn her steering wheel to her right, turning the wheels away from Ross. As Renee Good drives forward and to her right, we see Ross pull out his gun and fire the first shot. It appears to hit the bottom corner of the driver's side windshield. Ross fires twice more, apparently into the open driver's side window, as Renee Good pulls away.
Okay. So that's a more analytic version of events, and what you'll notice from the outset is it contrasts quite starkly with the state version. Okay, and it also seems to be much more concerned to support its account with evidence than the state version does. So, on the surface of it, we have a dispute. We have a contestation of meaning around the death of this person, okay? And it seems, at least when we start looking into it, that the contestation is around two key points. Number one, did Renee Good attempt to hit Agent Ross with her car, or didn't she? Okay. The second point seems to be, was Agent Ross's reaction a legitimate act of legal self-defense, or wasn't it? Okay, and then there's a kind of explosion of argumentation on the internet about this. This kind of becomes this part of this viral culture war that is at the heart of US society at the moment. Now, when you step back from that and look at it from a legal standpoint, like not just like, okay, let's describe events, like what's the, for a start, the legal context? There's a couple of things that are worth knowing in terms of the law that applies here. Firstly, officers are not allowed to block vehicles. They're not permitted to do that. They're not permitted to use the blocking of a vehicle as a way of escalating violence, regardless of the context in which it's occurring. And they're also specifically prohibited under law from using lethal force simply to prevent people leaving a scene. Okay, all of these are specified under law and prohibited under law. At the same time, the government, specifically the Department of Justice, specifically their kind of human rights division, refused to open a constitutional investigation into whether Renee Good's human rights had been violated. Okay. As a result, a bunch of their own staff resigned from the Department of Justice. Then the government, the national government took over the investigation and excluded state and local investigative bodies from gathering evidence on the scene. So they actually excluded the local cops and the authorities in the state from investigating this, which is highly unprocedural. So, what's going on? And what seems to be interesting to me, this is really what fascinates me, is that having read far too much online commentary on this video, what really stays with me is that what one can see in the chatter is that different people see completely different things when watching exactly the same video. This video footage is widely available. The scene, the cell phone scene of her driving away, has been shared millions of times. The scene from the officer's surveillance camera, where you can see him, well, from his sort of shooter point of view, him shooting her, all of that's available. Yet the availability of this evidence does nothing to achieve consensus about what actually happened. And that's what interests me. What interests me is that the evidence does not contribute to any kind of interpretative consensus. And I want to understand that process, okay? And it seems to me that there's something happening before people see the video, okay? And this is really what I'm interested in trying to articulate. On the one hand, there's a group of people that see a federal agent doing their legitimate work, being prevented by some subversive elements in society and being forced to take action to protect themselves. 1/3 of America sees that when they see the video. Another group sees a violent and extrajudicial public execution of a civilian by a state agent, okay? And I'm not sure what the proportion is there. It's certainly the dominant proportion in my social media feed, but my social media feed is nothing if not a representative sample of the world, okay? Having had those two accounts, amongst this audience, is there a preference for like version 1 or version 2? I mean, I'm going to assume there's a strong preference for the second version, okay? I'm going to assume that. But whatever it is, whatever version people are going for, I'm somewhat less interested in like pointing out that one version is true and one version is false. And I'm much more interested in pointing out how people came to occupy those positions, how it became compelling to them that when they saw this particular scene, an interpretation was self-evident to them. And this is what I'm really interested in. And so the point I make there is that people do not see with their eyes, but with their minds. They interpret experience based, they interpret experience through broader understandings of the world. So, and we have this kind of idea that like seeing is truth, okay? And that's exactly what I'm rejecting in this analysis. I'm saying if we want to understand what people see, we've got to understand what they think before they look. So what is it? And it seems to me that what's behind this interpretative conundrum is two different versions of the United States, okay? And these are kind of fundamentally politically incompatible versions. And the one is that the United States is under threat. It's been systematically weakened by decades of liberal nonsense, human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, wokeness, feminism, virtue signaling, multiculturalism, and most of all, migration. Okay, and that's a version of the United States, and that's the version of the United States that democratically elected Donald Trump twice. Okay, then there's another version of the United States, is that the state exists to serve democracy, to serve its constitution, and all of that to serve the will of the people. In that version, the US is currently under sort of life in threatening kind of circumstances of rising authoritarianism, okay? And that authoritarianism has a number of different effects. That active attempts are being made to subvert democracy, and we know that not only by what we see, but because the people trying to subvert democracy are going on social media saying that is their intention. There's an entire network of people, the Dark Enlightenment, the PayPal mafia, these billionaire class, that are publicly making the claim that democracy and human rights were a catastrophe and need to be replaced post-haste with a different system of kind of techno-feudalism, okay? And they're not shy about that. Okay, so attempts are being made to subvert democracy, to replace the rule of law with submission to authority, and to reverse the democratic advances of human rights of the past decades and replace them with this kind of emergent fascism which is associated with the Trump regime. Now, one of the interesting things about those two versions, obviously they can't both be true, but that they coexist in a kind of way that does not allow any meaningful conversation to occur between them. If anything, people lament the problem of social polarization and how social polarization has become the kind of fundamental problem of contemporary US culture and contemporary Western culture around the world. In fact, they moan about this all over Europe and Australia. There's a kind of real anxiety about social polarization. And there are multiple theories about, well, what's that about? Like, what has led to that? But what I want to talk about is another piece of context of this scene, which I have variously referred to as a extrajudicial public execution, and other people have referred to as self-defense and all of that. Firstly, I'm not sure why we're talking about it, because there's nothing to see here. The cops in the United States systematically forever have killed 3 people a day. That's what they do. That's business as usual is the execution of a citizen or civilian every 8 hours or so. About 1,000 people a year get killed by US cops. What's interesting about that is we can compare that to South Africa. So the countries in the world where the cops kill the most people, what do you think the top one is? It's not the most obvious one. The country in the world the cops kill the most people is Venezuela. But coming in at a highly competitive number 2 is South Africa. South Africa is the highest killing of civilians by police officers, 2nd highest in the world, and 3rd in the world. You have to disaggregate a country into 2 groups, into its white citizens and its black citizens, and cops kill African Americans at the 3rd highest rate of any population group in the world. They only kill their white citizens at the 14th highest rate in the world. So there's massive discrepancy between cops' inclination to kill African Americans and European Americans, okay? And what we've seen in recent years is the kind of growth of a shift around this question of police killing. And the precipitating moment, most of you will remember, was the murder of George Floyd, where we watched him being essentially tortured to death in public for 8 minutes and 47 seconds, in public view, begging for help. And that started the Black Lives Matter movement. It didn't start the Black Lives Matter movement. That caused the pre-existing Black Lives Matter movement to kind of explode as a major social phenomena. And the important thing that happened there, like the important thing that happened with Renee Good, like the important thing that happened with Pretti, is that people got the stuff on their phones, okay? And this is a historically new capability. When I was a student, people didn't have cell phones, and for the first 2 years that they had cell phones, they didn't have cameras in them. And the absolute normality that everyone always has a video camera on them everywhere is a relatively new state of affairs that has fundamentally changed the ability of authorities to sustain their narratives, okay? And that's one of the things that's going on here. That's one of the things that's going on with BLM and the killing of George Floyd. That we need to think about the relation between technology, modes of representation, and understandings of the social world. Okay. Now, one of the assumptions about policing in a democratic society, and I stress the word democratic there, is that policing should be for the equal protection of all citizens of the state. That's literally what it's there for, okay? But there's another common version of that, which we contrast with democratic policing, which is colonial policing. And colonial policing is really about policing for the protection of one group against another. And this is like apartheid policing. Okay, this is where the police serve a particular privileged group, ensure that they are safe by using violence against other groups that are not privileged, okay? And we see this historically in colonial societies, but what I'm interested in the way in which it kind of re-erupts in post-colonial societies also, okay? So, let's look at the guy who pulled the trigger, Jonathan Ross, and find out what his story is. Firstly, he was a US soldier. He was part of the US's illegal invasion of Iraq, where they killed 1 million Iraqi people. So that's where he learned to use violence, okay? He learned to use violence in a context of Western colonialism, of a Western attack against people of another nation and another culture. So we've got this kind of colonial racism already built into his training, where part of his military training was the normalized killing of people who were different from him, which is not something that is supposed to be normalized into democratic policing. The other thing that we see going on in general in the United States in policing is a massive influence of Israel on American policing. So there's this huge program by which Israel is involved with the training of US police officers. Police officers are sent over there for training. Experts are brought from Israel to the United States in order to train them. But of course, the problem there is Israel is a kind of classic situation of colonial policing. The policing in Israel is a policing for the safety of Zionists against Palestinians, and for the suspension of any notion that Palestinians' human rights should be protected in the way that Jewish-Israeli rights are protected. So we see this kind of systematic history now escalating into full-blown kind of historical genocide of a model of population control, okay? So we've both got this kind of military colonialism, and we've got this kind of policing colonialism all being assembled. And what people have started analyzing this have been pointing out is that us are a really interesting state agency. Okay, they're not the police. Immigrations and custom enforcement in the United States, they just are like, they're the border police. They in fact, and to a certain extent, they're supposed to be border administration. They are there to deal with undocumented migration. But what's recently happened is they've shifted from being an administrative function of the state to being a different kind of social apparatus. They've always been involved with the function of controlling migration. But they've become something else, and the something else that they've become has become quite visible. Firstly, their budget has gone up by orders of magnitude. They now have the budget of the 4th biggest army in the world. Like, they're bigger than 190 other armies in the world. And they're not even an army, they're not even the police force. They're just a kind of border regulation entity. Secondly, there's a shift in them ideologically, that they are no longer simply part of the practical application of certain kinds of bureaucracy. They seem to have been granted a kind of a radical autonomy and independence to act outside the normal restraints of the law, the restraints on the one hand of military discipline, or the restraints of the laws that somewhat curtail the use of police against civilian populations. Okay, they seem to have stepped outside of that. And one of the most visible ways in which they've done it is the fact that they unlike any other kind of similar agency, they operate with masks on. They don't wear ID tags. Police are required to wear identification and to identify them. ICE are essentially a covert police. They're essentially a secret police, okay, in that they operate in public, but they operate in anonymity. That you can't film them and identify who they are because they conceal their identities. On the other hand, they are carrying the most advanced surveillance technology of any similar organization in the world. And once again, this is a technology advanced specifically in relation to Israel and the surveillance of the unwanted populations of Palestine. Okay, so when ICE walk around on their phones, not on their body cams, on their phones, they have an app that they can point at any person and immediately know who that person is, everything about them. So you as a citizen have no anonymity in relation to ICE, but ICE have total anonymity in relation to you, okay? And it's worse than that. They've got another kind of surveillance app. This is also a kind of Palantir Israel kind of manifestation of what technology is about to become for all of us. For those of you who have the slightest traces of optimism about AI and where it's going, is they have an app which, like Google Maps, gives them a map of the area and then identifies people and ranks them on the likelihood that they might be infringing immigration rules. And then gives ICE their photograph and their address and their place of work and where they drop their kids off at school. And ICE can just follow this stuff. But all of this is probabilistic. None of it is actually the tested evidence. It's just like when we scoop up, which our Elon Musk specifically did with Doge, everyone's data in what were protected silos of information. When we scoop all of that up and run it through AI and say, who's likely to be infringing customs and immigration? It just pops up these people and then sends ICE out to kind of do these urban pogroms against people who are believed to maybe have breached immigration documentation. And not only that, but one of the interesting things about ICE is they fundamentally are uninterested in whether it's true or not. Because like so many universities today, they work through kind of KPIs, through measures of success. And the measure of success is arrests. It is not successful prosecutions. It is not successful border enforcement outcomes. It is simply arrests. So to properly succeed in ICE, you have to meet your arrest quotas of the day and the week and the month and the year. And it doesn't matter to you as an agent whether those are completely bogus arrests unrelated to any real testable information, okay? And what people who are more familiar with the United States have pointed out is that this not only looks like a classical secret police under fascism, it also looks like something much more familiar in the United States, which is a slave patrol, which is under slavery, these groups of kind of white vigilantes or deputized citizens who go out looking for runaway slaves to catch and to take them back into slavery, okay? That there's a structural similarity going on there. Why? Okay, why? Why is this happening? And it's Trumpism, right? ICE is Trumpism. So you know what that's about. They're eating the cats. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. And what's his name, that annoying right-wing dude who makes jingles out of it? This is a claim by Trump about Somali immigrants. A kind of just bogus, fantastical, hallucinated kind of ChatGPT level of hallucination of like, oh no, these Somali immigrants are eating our pets. I mean, once again, no kind of supporting evidence for that, but this was a really politically mobilizing thing. But symbolic also, okay? Symbolic of the construction of a particular idea that is unfortunately rather familiar to us, okay? And what MAGA is about, Make America Great Again. What does that mean, Make America Great Again? On the one hand, it's like, well, make America economically successful, but it's not that, because America was really economically successful under Biden, in fact. But America, it depends what you mean by economically successful, because there are two different versions of it. The one is whether people are living well, and the other is whether billionaires are likely to become trillionaires. And those are really two different positions in reality, okay? And so when one looks at the actual documentation behind MAGA, and specifically this extraordinary document, Project 2025, which is the kind of ideological little red book of MAGA, it's about creating a pre-1960s, 1970s human rights world, creating a world where there was complete control by white Christian patriarchal society, and all of these other terrible nightmares that apparently have occurred, multiculturalism, diversity, inclusion, equity, all of these things that have freaked out the MAGA base, didn't exist, and they're trying to get back to where they didn't exist. Okay, and so in this sense, the job of ICE, which is doing something with undocumented migrants, it's simply a racial supremacist project of reinstating whiteness. It's simply a project of reinstating the master race in America. And this is why, this is the tell in it, is that while they are spending literally billions of dollars getting rid of undocumented migrants, they're creating visas for white Afrikaners to go over to the United States at exactly the point where they're saying, we've got to stop migration. Because it's not about migration, it's about race. It's about the re-whitening of the United States and getting rid of everyone else. It's essentially a neo-Nazi project, if you want to look at it that way. So the underlying anxiety is not just the anxiety of the kind of collapsing middle classes, the collapsing of the wealthy working classes, which resulted from kind of neoliberalism and the offshoring of labor. It's about the statistical inevitability of white folks in the United States becoming a demographic minority. That is the thing that when they lie in bed at night and wake up in a panic, that it's about whiteness becoming a minority, okay? And there's a whole theory about this. There's an entire body of analysis called replacement theory, and this has been developed for nearly 100 years now. Out of the United States, there's this anxiety that white people were going to be replaced by kind of multiculturalism. And this theory was actually developed in the United States and taken from the United States by Hitler and then reworked into his Nazi ideology. But he didn't invent it. He got it from the US originally. And it comes out once again locally to us in the form of white genocide theory. So you'll know there's this kind of like white farmer killing paranoia / white genocide theory / the foreign minister in Australia and Trump saying, oh, we've got to take refugees from white farmers from South Africa because they're getting genocided. And tomorrow I'm going to talk about genocide bullshit a lot, because that's unfortunately one of my expert areas. But this white genocide theory is an articulation of replacement theory. And the reason that Trumpists love South Africa is because it seems to provide these kind of spurious little eruptions of evidence of physical violence against white people, which they then interpret as being uniquely racialized, okay? But in fact, in its broadest sense, replacement theory is not a theory of violent genocide. It's a theory of genetic genocide. It's a theory, and if you read the manifestos of these mass shooters, the mass shooter in Norway, the mass shooter in Christchurch who went into those 2 mosques and killed 51 people, that mass shooter starts his manifesto with the words, it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates, it's the birth rates, okay? That what obsesses him is the fact that people who are not white are reproducing faster than white people, which is simply statistically true. That white people all over the world are not really, they have a declining birth rate. It's they're having less than 2 kids for each couple. But what this means is not that we are embracing a new rainbow dawn of multiculturalism. What it means for them is literally the end of the world. Literally the end of civilization, because civilization is Western civilization, is whiteness. And so their articulation of genocide is this kind of biological inevitability. And in that sense, and I think we need to take this really seriously, ICE is an ethnic cleansing project. It is nothing less than that. And that it is built on white genocide theory. And in that sense, in the same sense that Zionism is an ethnic cleansing project, MAGA is an ethnic cleansing project. And that's why they are absolutely ideologically inseparable, and also inseparable as a kind of single military operation. So that's what we're dealing. But you may say, Renee Good is a white woman. Why are they ethnically cleansing white women? White supremacism is supposed to, its primary function in the world, the reason it exists is to make white people safe. And especially in a form of patriarchy that says it is the role of white men to make white women safe from other races, okay? So why are they killing their white women? Well, because she's not a real white woman, okay? And they have worked out discursive ways of removing her status as a white woman. Okay, so they have to strip her of her gender. Firstly, by pointing out that she's not a real white woman, she's a lesbian, okay? And that she shouldn't have been engaging in social protest. She should have been home doing the womanly job of looking after her children. So she has betrayed white femininity through queerness and through choice of activity, okay? So her gender is suspect out the gate. Secondly, she's stripped of race, okay? That her whiteness, and we see this, it's so interesting, her whiteness is constituted by her participating in a social system of whiteness. And when you look at the slurs that are directed towards people like Renee Good and that community. I mean, the one that fascinates me the most is they keep using this word blue-haired, like blue-haired Portland barista, okay? Like, what the fuck is MAGA so freaked out about blue hair for? And it's really interesting, but if you want to know, you must watch Fox News. Fox News is the most extraordinary thing. Every single female presenter on Fox News has hair lighter than this, but like going halfway down their backs. Like blue eyes and blondness are absolutely constitutive of feminine whiteness, and thinness also. You have to be thin and blonde, okay? And people who deliberately color their hair, like this has got a bit of pink in the top, which is pretty much washed out. People who color their hair are already race traitors in that kind of supremacist articulation, okay? But not only that, then every other kind of communist, queer, woke, leftist, agitator, and all of this revealed by the fact that she was involved in undermining the state by a particularly reprehensible activity. Not just any activity, but the activity of defending the rights of other social groups. This is the unforgivable sin that strips her of her femininity and strips her of her whiteness. The fact that she's an advocate of universal human rights. And so she's not those things anymore. And because she's not those things anymore, she no longer has the full status of a human with human rights. She becomes an executable subject of MAGA, okay? But the worst thing she did, the absolute unforgivable sin in all of this, is she was disrespectful to authority. And this is where the recording on the agent's body cam has got a little tell in it. Like, he doesn't say much. He says, get out of the car. And then she's driving away, and then it's bam, 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 and she shoots her, and she's dead. And he sees her body, and he says, fucking bitch, okay? And these words are the key to understanding the other dimension of power, okay? Every one of us who's worked at all in gender-based violence knows those words. We know when those words are used. We know the tone with which those words are used, okay? These are the words that are used to legitimate masculine rage and violence, okay? These are the categorization of the disobedient woman, the woman who does not respect proper authority, the woman who thinks that her status and her rights are equivalent to those of patriarchal authority. And this is the woman that triggers homicidal rage in certain kind of men, okay? It's also true that people who are perceived as insubordinate relative to their racial subordination, when they, and there used to be a South African expression for this, which I will not repeat in this room, of a person from a formerly subordinated race who does not understand that their role is to be submissive, and that this triggers unlimited violence and legitimates unlimited violence, okay? And what I was interested by is looking at the chatter after her death, that there were just these kind of hordes of men who were justifying her execution, but they were justifying it for the same reason over and over again, is that she disobeyed an agent of the state. She disobeyed an agent of white patriarchal state authority, okay? And they repeatedly come up with these little phrases like, you know who didn't get shot? Women who stayed at home looking after their children. And this is I'm really interested in these kind of statements. I mean, there's like a thought-terminating cliche, because on the one hand, that is true, that women who stayed at home looking after their children didn't get shot. But the truth of it is also a lie when it's proposed in this context, because it implies that the only time that a woman or any person can claim safety is when they know their place in society. If they start engaging in any acts of independence, rebelliousness, criticism, defiance, they lose their human rights protection within those systems, whether that system is an interpersonal relationship or whether that system is a relation to the state, okay? So really what we're seeing here is a fight about who is human. That in the heart of this fight over the public execution of Renee Good is a debate around who is human. Who gets to get human rights, okay? And on the one hand, there's a version which says the dominant racial and economic groups, the protected genders, those genders that have been rubber stamped as being okay, and those people who submit to the formal regimes of authority, those people get human rights. And everyone who doesn't fit into that, their human rights are negotiable / non-existent, depending on where you are on that spectrum of fascism, okay? As opposed to a completely different philosophy, a completely different way of thinking about the world, way of thinking about what a person is, way of thinking about what democracy and human rights are, which is that everybody gets human rights. That is, that they are literally the inalienable rights of all human persons, okay? And that those rights do not get suspended when you engage in independent actions or thoughts, criticisms, even acts of defiance, even openly challenging formal regimes of authority. And that's really what we've got to think about here, is that there are fundamentally different belief systems, worldviews around who gets human rights and in what conditions human rights get suspended. And this is where I get really interested as a person who works on kind of multiple levels of violence and rights. Because here I start finding myself getting drawn to the language of gender violence, specifically intimate violence, and the kind of conceptual frameworks that people have articulated for talking about how violence occurs there. And one of the things the ideas I've been using a lot in the last 2 years in a number of different contexts is a fairly kind of within gender violence psychology established notion of DAVO, which is an abbreviation which stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender, okay? And this is like the steps taken by domestic abusers almost always in talking about what they're doing, okay? So firstly, they deny that they're violent, okay? And instead of being like, I lost my temper, they'll be like, why do you make me so angry, okay? Then if the violence has to be acknowledged in some way, it is justified, okay? But the important thing there is the RVO, which is reverse victim and offender. And that's the mechanism of why do you make me so angry? Not I lost my temper, why do you make me so angry? It takes the actions of the perpetrator of violence and lays the blame for them on the victim of the violence. It claims that if the victim hadn't done these things, the violence would never have occurred. Therefore, the victim is the perpetrator, and the perpetrator is the victim of the victim, okay? And this is what the insight of Darvo is all about, okay? It's about this, it's about this inversion of causality, of blaming the victim, okay? And my argument here is that Trumpism does a Darvo on Renee Goodman. It makes her it makes her the perpetrator by provoking the agent by not obeying his instructions. That she goes beyond the bounds of what is socially acceptable by when he says get out of the car, she instead drives away. And he is so enraged by her driving away instead of getting out of the car that he kills her for it. Okay? And this is a really common pattern of masculine rage specifically. So we're not just talking about racial anxiety here, we're talking about kind of gendered rage and the way in which men kill women, also the way in which men kill each other. Because this is really interesting. Statistically in South Africa, most murders are committed by young men, but most victims of murders are also young men, and most of the scenes of murder are not what would be considered crimes. They're not hijackings, they're not burglaries, they're not housebreakings. They are when some guys are hanging out, drinking, and someone disrespects someone else. That is the statistically most common scene of murder in South Africa. When one man appears to disrespect another man, and the result is death. That form of masculinity can only survive by annihilating everything that shames it. Okay. So there's that. But also, my favorite term, and this is why I love the internet, because I learn all my best concepts from the internet. And the best concept I've learned in the last decade is gaslighting. Because when I was a student, I thought the best concept I learned was ideological mystification. But it turns out these are the same concept, right? But they articulated at different structural levels. That ideological mystification it happens at the kind of social level. It happens by like the state apparatuses, you know, ideological and repressive state apparatus, blah, 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 blah. Another time I'll talk to you about why Althusser saved my life. But gaslighting talks about the process of ideological mystification at the point of interpersonal experience. The way in which people who you are close to make you feel crazy sometimes by asserting a version of reality that is so opposite to what you actually know to be true that you feel mad. And you have a number of choices at that point. You're either like, well, I must be wrong, and then you just start believing their version instead of your version, or you stay mad and you try and do something about that, or you try and get the hell out of that situation, which that's my recommended course of action. But unfortunately, gaslighting happens at social levels too. That gaslighting happens not just like in a room with a person, with your parents gaslighting you about Father Christmas and whatever. They happen at these massive political levels. They happen with the apartheid government gaslighting you about what apartheid really was. They happen with like Israel gaslighting you about the history of Palestine. They happen as the kind of systemic production of society, okay? And what I want to point out is that these terms that come out of the interpersonal psychological violence are actually also very, very productive political terms. That we need to talk about Darvo and gaslighting as political strategies, and we need to talk about the way MAGA not only gaslights everyone else, but the way it gaslights its own supporters, because that's where the real gaslighting happens inside the community, inside. Not like, later on we'll get on to trying to gaslight everyone out there. But the important thing is to gaslight people on the inside, to tell them that Trump is going to raise the price of eggs, okay? And to get them to believe that, and he's going to make America great again, and they believe that. So it's kind of the gaslighting of the in-group is even more important than the gaslighting of the entire society. What does this mean for South Africa? Because the United States is just a stupid and boring place, apart from the fact that they've got the biggest military machinery in human history. Apart from that they are terribly dangerous militarily. They're really a society I don't want to waste my intellectual energy talking about, except as a moral tale, okay? So, what do we learn about the gaslighting of the United States and the Davo of Renee Good when we start thinking about South Africa? And we start looking at the way in which politicians give these kind of denialist accounts, okay? They give these accounts that are kind of counter to reality, and people look at it and be like, what the hell are you saying? And two things, like, listening to SAFM while I was driving around lately, and this Lesefi, was it, who was like, if there's no water, then I check into a hotel. And people were outraged. But on the one hand, this is obviously true. If there's no water in Joburg, just check into the Saint and Sun. Wouldn't any normal person do that? Okay? And the gaslighting in that is, of course, normal people cannot do that. They are not living some kind of high life off taxpayers' money, that this is not a choice that is available to South Africans. And for someone to act as if it is, because it is for them, that is solid gaslighting, okay? And it kind of enrages people. So there's that element going on. I think we need to look at the way we get gaslit by people in power, whether it's, and all political parties, like whether it's, the DA or ANC or any other power group, okay? The other thing, and the core constitutive tactic of Trumpism is to identify social ills, that people are really having a hard time. Economic conditions have gotten much worse for the middle and working classes in the United States, okay? And then blame it on something other than what caused it. They don't blame it on neoliberalism, international outsourcing of labor, all of those. They don't talk about those things. They blame it on minorities and particularly vulnerable minorities. And then by blaming it on those minorities, they legitimate violence against them. And I was interested yesterday, hearing people phone in on SAFM, talking about this Bolt driver who was brutally murdered by one of his, a group of his customers, okay? And the first thing that people did over and over again when they phoned in is like, yeah, but he's a Nigerian, okay? How the hell is that relevant? Like, in what universe is his national origin relevant to his murder? But in fact, to the callers, this almost reached not only the level of explanation, but the level of justification, okay? And they would never say that. But the way they were speaking is seeming to imply, well, there's different people have a different level of right to life in this country. And undocumented migrants are really way down on our sort of pyramid of right to life. And that seemed to be being proposed as common sense, okay? Which is exactly what MAGA say. Like, literally that view, you just change the terms and you've got MAGA. You've just got the idea that, oh, well, there's this particular minority, the government or other authorities have told us that it's their fault that we are unemployed, can't get jobs, that there's crime in our neighborhoods. Therefore, we suspend their human rights, and just violence against them is justified. Okay, and you can do it anywhere. You can do it in the UK. You can make $1 billion selling children's fantasy books, and then you can say we have to beat up trans women in toilets because they make us scared of gender violence, even though statistically there is simply no evidence to back that up. You can just make up shit like that as you go along. You take a vulnerable group, you attribute a real social evil, gender-based violence, to them, and you say, knock yourself out, go do with those people what you want. Kick them out of school, beat them up, do what the hell you feel like. We are degrading their human status and suspending their human rights, okay? So my conclusion on all of this is that there seems to be a war of civilizations, let us say, to misappropriate a horrible other analysis. On the one hand, between the belief that authoritarianism and state and vigilante violence makes people safer, that is a core popular belief in South Africa and the constitutive belief of Trumpism, versus another belief that, in fact, the robust protection of universal human rights is what solves all of the problems that are turning up as the other threats in society. And that the more effective way of trying to solve multiple and complex problems is to proceed via that universal protection of human rights, rather than through the kind of easier option of populist legitimation of violence towards vulnerable targets. And that's my story.